Dr. Jeremy Weiss here with Rise 25. I am here with Jerry Nylons, and she is the founder of Trade Press Services. You can go to tradepressservices.com. And we were just chatting, and I thought it was a really interesting life lesson. And what they do is they help B2B businesses with their marketing, the right message, the right medium. But we were talking about, oftentimes, Jerry, life lessons bleed into our business, and there's a lot of parallels there. And you were talking about, because of whenever anyone's listening to this, there's always stuff going on, fires in our business, literal fires outside. And that's what we were talking about. And you said, yeah, I watched my house burn down. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's hit record. Walk me through, like, what happened that day.
Sure. It was 1977, and my husband and I had just come back from a trip to Europe, and I went. That was on a Sunday, and on Monday I went to work. My kids were 8, 9, and 10 at the time, and I decided to leave work early to come home and be home when the kids came home. And on my way home, I could see a fire. And I could hear the news, and then it became evident to me that the fire had jumped the freeway and was headed toward Malibu, where we lived.
It was like a forest fire, or what?
It started in the mountains of Calabasas, which is dry, mountainous brush. And even though it was in October, we get these Indian summers out here in California, so it was really hot, and it was windy, and the fire just spread so rapidly through the mountains to Malibu, where we live. And when I arrived at Pacific Coast Highway, which is the main road in and out of Malibu, there was a police car that said, "We're only letting residents in." And I said, "I'm a resident." So I was able to turn onto Pacific Coast Highway. And when I got to the street where we lived, there were 2 police cars and fire cars, and they said, "We're only letting residents in, the houses are burning." And I said, "Well, I don't know where my children are, and I'm concerned." And so they put me in a fire car, and they drove up to the house. The house was burning at the time.
Wow.
And the fireman went into the house, and he came back holding my bedspread in his arms. I thought it was a body. I was terrified. And he said, "Oh, no. There's nobody in the house. I grabbed your jewelry chest. What else do you want?"
Wow.
And I said, "Nothing. Just get me out of here." And so they went around the corner, and they were able to get through to where I left my car. And at that time we didn't have cell phones, so we were at the mercy of payphones and trying to track down my children and where they were. And
Yeah, we just take that for granted now. Oh, you buzz them up on a cell phone, but we didn't have cell. I always wondered, Jerry, like when I was growing up, like, how did we even get in touch with each other? Like, we're meeting at a event, we had no cell phone, so yeah.
No, you went, and then, if you were late, then it's a problem. And then is there anybody else you can contact and let them know you're going to be late? And it really was a different way of life way back then. So I finally found my children and my husband, and we spent the evening at my in-laws' house. We had to go out and buy toothbrushes. We had absolutely nothing left. And the kids didn't understand it, until the next day when we drove by the house again. And they said, "But what about our bikes? What about our Hot Wheels?" And they were all gone.
Wow.
And my feeling was, those are all material things. It didn't bother me as much as it bothered them. And my husband too, it really bothered them. He was really shaken up by the experience. And maybe I'm just more practical or less emotional.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's that. I think it's just scary. And you were just looking at it probably from like a maternal standpoint of like, okay, children's are good, check. Husband's good, check. I'm good. Like probably they didn't see a fireman come out with a blanket thinking there's a dead body in it. And so anything else beyond, okay, everything's fine, seems okay when you put it in that perspective, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the case.
Yeah.
And later on, as we began to replace items, one of the things I couldn't replace was my bell collection. I had a collection of bells from all over the world. My husband had a collection of beer steins from all over the world. And I was keeping my father's postcard collection from all over the world. You don't replace those things.
Right.
And so material items just weren't important to me anymore.
Yeah.
And even when people would try and buy me bells, it was meaningless.
Right. It was the whole experience and the memory of where you were and everything else.
It was. And realizing that your life can change in an instant. Talk about a life lesson.
Yeah. And we were talking too, like, how does this play into business or life in general? And it's really, what's important, right? What's important in life and business. And when you're talking, it's like, what's really important is the relationship. So I think tying it back into the business side of things, when you're making a decision from a business standpoint with a client, a customer, or a staff member, is thinking about that, like what's most important, in thinking of the relationship, right?
Well, right. It's going the extra mile. And I had a situation I can remember where somebody who was working for me all of a sudden just stopped doing a good job. And I said, what's going on? And she broke down crying and, circumstances, husband, kids, and it was horrible. And I really had to say to myself, what's important is her mental health right now. It's not the job she does for me. It's showing her that I care about her as an individual. And I think that went a long way. And she was with me for 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And looking at it from their perspective, as opposed to, what happened to your work? It's, instead of getting mad, you kind of wanted to get to the root of what actually is causing this.
Right.
Yeah. Jerry, thank you. I think this is super valuable. It's always good to hear, life lessons like that, because we do oftentimes, or at least I do, take things for granted at a daily basis, which I should kind of like, oh, my house is still there when I get home. Like we just take that for granted. Right. And so when we experience those things, it makes us reflect on what is actually important. So I appreciate you sharing.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Everyone check out tradepressservices.com to learn more. And thanks again.
All right, great.